Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of the Crimson Crossover podcast presented by the Field of 68 and J&J Apparel. I'm your host, Christian Sykes, joined as always by Joey Blackwell and Charles Branch. How are you guys doing today?
Well, I'm not a fan of the South Alabama Jags, so it's been a pretty good day today. Other than that, looking forward to breaking down this tournament. Disappointing. I can't really say it was a disappointing trip to Nashville, just because that's kind of what we thought was going to happen as far as Alabama's trip up there is concerned. But still looking forward to what we have coming up. We have a pretty good bracket. So
Would have liked to have played one more game in Nashville. I do feel like we accomplished what we needed to, and still just be sitting here middle of March talking about a team that was solidly in the NCAA tournament again, and talking about what the path looks like and having a lot of confidence in that path, and not just a path to get to the second weekend, but to go further. It's as frustrating as this season has been at times, this team has still put themselves in a very strong position to continue to make history, and excited to get into it with y'all here in the next few minutes.
Yeah, I mean, we'll talk about the NCAA bracket draw and just kind of our general opinions on that. But before we do that, let's just quickly touch on just the SEC tournament, Alabama's performance, and just the overall results. Um, for me, I mean, it's good that Alabama wins one versus Kentucky. It's the first time in Alabama basketball history that you've won three straight versus Kentucky. All happened in the same season, which is great. I think you break a 12-game losing streak over Kentucky within that time frame, dating back to like the early 2000s. And generally, I think Alabama performed well. Obviously, it was a depleted Kentucky team that lost Lamont Butler early in that game. Jackson Robinson, I think he's done for the season. Chris, I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce his name. He's been done for the season. Um, I think to the point where they had like guys that are 10th or 11th on their bench playing. They didn't have a point guard. Um, and it was unfortunate. And I think also Andrew Carr was in foul trouble that entire game and also didn't play. So it was a
Take
good
Elway
win.
also took the elbow
Oh,
from.
oh wait, also, yeah, yeah. So for Kentucky, like you were really depleted as far as your team was concerned. Um, and for Alabama, it was a really good result. I don't think they particularly shot very well from three. It was okay, not amazing from what we've seen from this Alabama team. And then you go into the Florida game with the one seed on the line. And when Grant Melson goes down, I think that's when Alabama kind of maybe mentally shut things down. They came out in the second half kind of flat. Obviously, Nate Oates after the game had the comment about the timeouts where he's like, "What do you want me to do? Call a timeout and tell him to play better?" Like we've already told him to do that, which I think also is an additional indication that maybe the coaching staff and the players kind of mentally checked out of that game once Grant Nelson kind of went down. You didn't see Darian Reed come back in, which I thought maybe that would be prime, minutes for him to get. But obviously, I think that they were more worried about the injury situation. Mark Sears tweaks his ankle early in the game. He doesn't shoot well. It's 5 of 17. I put out a tweet that ended up being 7 of 27 from your primary ball handlers isn't going to win you a game in March. Um, so Aiden Holloway needs to figure out the whatever shooting slump or struggles that he's got going on. Needs to figure that out. Mark Sears, I don't know what it is about big time games, but I mean, when he's playing the Floridas, the Tennessees, the Auburns of the world, outside of the Auburn game and in Coleman Coliseum, like those games, he's not very effective offensively. I think in the Auburn game at Auburn, he was effective because of his facilitating, but he still only had 9 points. And you do ultimately win that game. But when Grant Nelson goes down, Mark Sears needs to be able to step up. And I don't think he did versus Florida. I'm not entirely sure why Florida specifically gives him problems. Maybe it's their size. The fortunate thing about Alabama is they don't face a team that is as ranked as high as the last 6 games that they've played, at least until the Sweet 16. St. Mary's is ranked 22nd in Kim Palm. Mississippi State's ranked 32nd in Kim Palm. Over the last 9 games, Mississippi State is the lowest ranked Kim Pom team that Alabama has faced. Everybody else has been top 16 and above. Um, so maybe Alabama will get a little bit of a break from the schedule that they've played, and maybe they'll do something in the tournament. But if there's a team that's in the tournament that's battle tested, it's Alabama. So I'm hoping for good things in the NCAA tournament. What about you guys? What's your thoughts on the SEC tournament?
Yeah, SEC tournament wise, really liked how they came out on Friday. They had pretty much locked themselves at a 2 seed at that point, but that really was a final like massive statement of this is still a Bama team that is still one of the best teams in the country, regardless of the showing they had against Florida the week before. I think that I agree with you, Christian, in that I think Grant Nelson being out at Florida, it was ultimately the tipping point there. You hate to see players, kind of take that approach after Nelson was out, but at the same time, I think you're the one that made the point earlier this weekend about how, if you're a player and you see that happen, you're probably going to be playing more timid. You're probably going to want to stay healthy, at least, in a game like this. This isn't the NCAA tournament. Obviously, it means a lot to the fans and it means a lot to the players, but as far as trying to remain injury free, this game was really the last chance you have to do that to play a little bit more conservative. So overall, I really liked how we came out against Kentucky. I thought our defense played really well, and they kind of followed along the trend that we've really seen lately with the first Florida game out, being the weird outlier. Really, the last 5 or 6 games, they've really put together some solid performances. We saw it against Kentucky. We saw it in the first half against Florida. I think they trailed by 2 at halftime, but they still were playing really solid on defense. We were a Mark Sears 3 away from from being able to go on a run. I really think that if he had been able to score a little bit more offensively, particularly in the first half, that game probably could have been very different. And I'm not putting all the weight on his shoulders. I was just using him as an example. But I think if the shots had started to fall like we know that they can, I think that game probably could have gone a little bit differently. But regardless, it ended up giving Alabama an extra day of rest, which is good. There are positives from that game. It's definitely not a burn the tape game like the first game was against Florida. I think you really can learn from some of the shortcomings in it. But at the end of the day, I think it set us up for a solid bracket, like you said. Really until the Sweet 16 or the Elite Eight, you really have a field of opponents that I won't say pales in comparison because they're NCAA tournament teams, but they don't quite match up to the level that they've played the past few weeks. So really like how that's prepared them going into this tournament.
I was super impressed with Friday night. And starting with that, it's Kentucky and some of the comments that Mark Pope had made about what the SEC tournament means to Kentucky and Kentucky fans. I remember when the tournament was in Atlanta and the Georgia Dome for so many years before it finally found its home in Nashville, and Atlanta would be renamed Catlanta for those weekends where Kentucky would march their way to the championship game and would win a lot of those games. So even though Kentucky was depleted, and you have to admit they were depleted with multiple point guards out, Oweh getting hurt, and having a really tough game that they kind of almost gave away, but then Oweh had the heroics against his former team in Oklahoma. This is still something that means a lot to Kentucky fans. And I was really encouraged while the team may or may not have known what this game meant as far as it relates to the history books of beating Kentucky for the first time in the SEC tournament since 1983, being a part of the first Alabama team that not only beats Kentucky 3 times in the same season, but now is the first team to hold a 3-game winning streak at any point in the series against Kentucky. And that you beat Kentucky in a way that their fans were leaving very early in the second half. I was just really impressed with the way that we approached the game, how hard we played, the defensive effort. Even with all the guys out for them, Mark Pope has a very strong offense, runs a lot of great sets. And a guy like Kobe Brea, who has the ability to get hot, and I think started maybe 2 of 2 from 3, or at least hit his first 2 threes in the first half. He finishes the game with 8 points. I mean, you locked Kentucky down, holding them to 70 points in the game. And then seeing what LeBaron Philon did, I've thought as we get into March that he's a guy that could explode on the scene just with his ability to get to the rim and will probably have more opportunities against competition that hasn't been as tough as we've just faced. But that week off, in a sense, between the Auburn game where he had a lot of success and now this game against Kentucky seemed to really help him. He was a lot more explosive, obviously finished at 8 of 14 and 21 points. And we had some other guys continue to step up. Jaron Stevenson shooting the ball well from three. Again, I think there's a lot less movement in his shot. It's more of a flick of the wrist and it's going in. Aiden Holloway did go for 13 points. We need more from Aiden as we get into March. But it was, I think I texted our group. It was nice to sit back and really just enjoy the moment against Kentucky instead of having to sweat it out. And then you get into the game against Florida, and it's another game where it's elite basketball that's being played. And what's nice about that for Alabama basketball is we continue to see basketball games that are elite, and Alabama's a part of it, whether it's Alabama Auburn, Alabama Kentucky, Alabama Florida, Alabama Tennessee. And I feel like coming off the Florida game, I got a lot of comments from people of, man, we played so well in the first half and then we're still down two to Florida. Like I give Florida a lot of credit. But they hit some tough shots that I still don't feel like they typically would hit. Walter Clayton played really well for them. So I can hold both sides of it that I think we played fine. We didn't play perfect. We missed a lot of shots that we typically made. And Florida, made the shots that they needed to where they had a 2 point lead. And then so yes, you put on the injury news about Nelson not coming back in and how they started the second half of getting those four offensive rebounds. You could almost just see it in the faces of our guys of uh, just not being willing to step up to the challenge. And it was very frustrating to see, but we're still here in March, moving to the NCAA tournament, and we still have a lot to play for. And I agree with y'all's comments too about maybe there had been some timidness, especially with the injury bug that we have seen this year. I mean, we're talking about Grant Nelson, but we're also talking about Darian Reed, who's trying to come back from injury. We know what happened to Latrell Wrightsell. Mark Sears tweaks his ankle. Other guys have sporadically been on the injury report. So maybe there was some timidness knowing that you got to all you need is six more games, six more wins, and you're a national champion. So it was frustrating to see, but at the end of the day, I do think it was a successful trip to Nashville for this team, other than winning an SEC championship and getting a number one seed in the NCAA tournament.
Well, and I'll say this for fans, and I don't think there's a lot of them, but for fans that are upset about us losing to Florida, do you see Florida's draw in the NCAA tournament? I mean, it's absolutely brutal. That was just pure, like, don't they play UConn in the second game? Then they have like, what is it? Like Memphis is in their bracket. Um, Hold on, let me pull up the bracket.
I think Kansas is a 7 seed, St.
Yeah,
John's the 2,
Arkansas.
Arkansas,
uh,
Missouri, who's beaten them, of course, as the 6 seed.
Hold on, let me look at it. Yeah, they have Florida has UConn, Memphis, Maryland, who's a really good team. They won the Big Ten, or not, they didn't win the Big Ten. Michigan won the Big Ten, sorry. Missouri, who's beaten Florida. Texas Tech, who's one of the best defensive teams in the country. Kansas, who has all the talent in the world, and Bill Self as their head coach. Arkansas, again, all the talent in the world. John Calipari as their head coach. And then St. John's, again, who's one of the best defensive teams in the country. Not to mention Drake, who's is a sleeper pick for a lot of people as far as, potential upset bids. Like that would have been Alabama's draw if we got the one seed. And yeah, we talked about it a few weeks ago on here and then on spaces as well. As far as like, would you rather have a one seed or a two seed? I'd rather have a one seed just because you get to host the regional. You generally get the 8-9 matchups, things like that. But when you looked at the 8-9 lines compared to the 7-10 lines, like it was a little bit more advantageous to be a 2 seed. And so instead of having to play UConn or maybe Oklahoma, which it's going to most likely be UConn in the second round, instead Alabama plays St. Mary's or they play Vanderbilt, who they've already beaten. Like that's the difference in style or in the seed lines. And so um, I think it almost played to Florida's disadvantage to win the SEC tournament because of the draw that they got. And on top of that, they're in the West. So when they get to the Sweet 16, all of their fans have to go and travel to San Francisco instead of being able to go play in Newark, which I think there's a lot of Alabama fans that are in the New York area as far as like alumni are concerned, Northeast. And getting up to New York is a lot easier and a lot cheaper for Alabama fans than it is to get out west to San Francisco. So, I mean, I think it's advantageous for Alabama. It sucks that you lose, but I almost would rather be healthy and lose in the SEC tournament than have an issue where Florida lose hand logged in the SEC championship game, and it kind of derailed their NCAA tournament hopes after that. Like I would hate that to be Mark Sears, Cliff Amore, Grant Nelson. You know what I'm saying? So, um, not too terribly upset about it. But anything else about the SEC tournament? Nope. All right. Well, we'll move on to the.
I'll say this real quick. It was awesome. It was great basketball. It did not let down. There was a lot of hype going into it, and I think it lived up to the hype.
It's still insane to me that the conference finished 500. That's just ridiculous.
Well,
I mean, 15 of the 16 teams didn't win a conference championship this year.
Goodness gracious. It's so overrated.
I'll say this: the fact that the top 5 seeds are 4 of them were 1 or 2 seeds in the NCAA tournament is just absurd. Like thinking about that, it's just insane that what Auburn was the number 1 overall seed, Florida was the 4th overall seed, Tennessee was the 5th overall seed, Alabama was the 6th overall seed. That's the top 4 teams in the conference were top 6 teams in the country. Joey, I know you're a big baseball fan. It's a lot like SEC baseball this year, as far as what the conference did.
No, it is. It's very competitive. And we've said that all year. We've made that comparison even several times this year. And the thing about it is, you still typically will always have 4 or 5 teams that separate themselves in both baseball and basketball. It kind of goes back to what you were saying just now, with Alabama, Tennessee, Florida, and Auburn, obviously, but even Kentucky. And so even though you have that separation, though, we still had 14 teams make it, and that's pretty typical for baseball as well. You maybe not 14, but you typically have 8 to 8, 9, something like that. So, just stacked from top to bottom, and obviously we're looking forward to watching Alabama play. We're looking forward to watching Auburn play, but I'm really looking forward to watching games like with Texas A&M. I'm looking forward to watching Vanderbilt in their first round and their first tournament, and God knows how long. So it's just there's going to be a lot of really exciting, not just basketball, but SEC basketball.
Absolutely. So let's get into the draw. Alabama's a 2 seed in the East region with Duke as their 1 seed, playing the Sweet 16 Elite 8 games in Newark. Alabama will be playing in Cleveland, Ohio for the first 2 rounds. And if they, again, get out, then they'll go to Newark and then from Newark to San Antonio. In their little Alabama's pod, you have St. Mary's, who's from the West Coast Conference, WCC, and Vanderbilt, who Alabama played earlier this year from the SEC. And then you have Robert Morris as a 15 seed, and which is spearheaded by Cam Woods from Bessemer, Alabama, who actually had a preferred walk-on, I guess, offer from the University of Alabama, decided to go to, I think, the junior college route, and then ends up in Robert Morris. So I think he was interviewed last year by AL.com asking if he still roots for Alabama, and he said yes. So I mean, he's an Alabama fan. He grew up, just down the road from Tuscaloosa. So it's kind of a cool story for him to be able to play against Alabama in the NCAA tournament. And then also in Alabama's bracket, you have BYU. Who's the 3 seed?
Johnson.
Wisconsin, and then obviously Duke as well as the 1 seed. So, what's your guys' thoughts on the draw, the bracket, just in general?
In general, I really like it. I like that, for those of you that might not have heard, to our listeners, Grant Nelson will be, he will be probably back on Sunday if Bama can make it through the first round, which I believe they will. So that's a positive thing when it comes to their entire bracket. But looking specifically at this Robert Morris game, I think it's a perfect opponent to face in the first round, because of Grant potentially being sidelined. They have a solid defense. They allow just over 70 points a game. I mean, Alabama almost allows 82 points a game, but they have a really solid defense. The big key, though, I think, is that they haven't played a top 25 opponent all season. They haven't won or lost against one all season long. So I think that with the tempo that Alabama plays, I really just keep your head on a swivel in that game. I don't think that Robert Morris will be quite ready. But like I said, I think that's a good first round. And then you have that potential St. Mary's matchup. I think we'll probably play at St. Mary's, but even if you're playing Vanderbilt, it's a team that you've beaten before. So really the first, I think, challenge would probably be in the Sweet 16, especially if you have Grant Nelson coming back against St. Mary's or Vanderbilt. The team's going to be excited for that. I see them winning that game. So anyways, make it to the Sweet 16. That's really the first potential challenge or speed bump you have. You'll have with probably either Wisconsin or BYU in that round. And so the fact that you can make it to the Sweet 16 before, facing caliber opponents that we've been, facing the past several months, you really have to like those odds. And especially this is an Alabama team like we saw last year. The further they play, the more momentum they get behind them. And so really, if they can put 2 solid wins under their belt heading into the Sweet 16, really, and especially if Duke gets upset potentially early on, really the sky's the limit for this team. I don't have them winning the whole thing, but I do really, really like the potential path that they have.
So talking about Robert Morris from the Horizon League, Robert Morris is 139th in KenPom overall. And I know I sent y'all earlier. If you take the cumulative rankings of our last 10 games, it's 140. So again, just to talk about how tough the stretch was that we just went through. I'm not trying to sound any alarm bells as far as upset capability or anything like that. We should have a lot more talent than Robert Morris, but we've also seen this team almost get beat by a 250 plus KenPom North Dakota team. And so, in my opinion, it's all about, do you respect playing in the NCAA tournament? Do you respect the opponent in front of you? And do you go out and give your max effort? Because even though I know we've got more talent than Robert Morris, as Christian just mentioned, Cam Woods from Bessemer played at Pinson Valley. This game is going to mean something to him. Amarian Dickerson, he's their third leading scorer at Robert Morris. He's from Cleveland, Ohio. It's going to mean something to him to play in an NCAA tournament game in Cleveland. They've got multiple guys that aren't from this country. They've got a guy from Spain. They've got a guy from Canada, Netherlands, Macedonia. Like, to me, I expect Robert Morris to respect and care about being in the NCAA tournament. That this is an awesome opportunity for their team and for their players. And my hope, and I think it will be, that our guys will respect what they have in front of them in the NCAA tournament. We could really, it's not really about X's and O's. It's about Jimmy and Joe's, in my opinion. And do our Jimmy and Joe's show up and play with max effort, which I expect us to do. And I expect us to get through the first round. And what's kind of interesting about the game, the potential second round matchup, As Vanderbilt, we've obviously played being from the SEC. Vanderbilt's more of an up-tempo team. Their Ken Pom tempo is 64. What's known about St. Mary's is they play really, really slow. They're 359th in Ken Pom tempo. So if St. Mary's gets past Vanderbilt, while Vanderbilt doesn't play as fast as we do, there will be some things that you'll be able to see immediately on tape from that game and probably looking at some of their games against Gonzaga that you can pick up and try to instill in your game against them on Sunday. And knowing that St. Mary's is probably going to want to slow the game down against us, and I think we have better players, more athleticism than St. Mary's. I'm hoping that on the offensive side, we send three, four guys to the offensive glass to go get rebounds. I can't see St. Mary's being a team that's going to get a defensive rebound and then try to outrun us back to get easy points. I think for them, it's probably more advantageous to try to slow the game down, walk it up, and run their offense against us. St. Mary's is 56 in Ken Pom offense. They're eighth in Ken Pom defense. So the more that they can keep things slow and take care of the ball and not create opportunities for us to get fast break points or points off turnovers, I think is what I would expect their game plan to be. And I know we're going to get more into that after we take care of Robert Morris. And of course, playing Vanderbilt, yes, we had success with them, but Vanderbilt's also been a team this year that beaten Kentucky, they've beaten Tennessee, they've beaten Missouri. It's another thing that respect the opponent and respect playing in the NCAA tournament. And I would expect us to get to the sweets, basically to get to the second weekend. Um, if it's playing a team like Wisconsin, I think they've got John Tonje, who I think is a transfer from Missouri and has been really good for them this year. Where we've really seemed to struggle in games that we've lost is when we've had the third, fourth, fifth scorer come out and have a career game against us. So, you try to limit Tonje as much as you can, but if that's all Wisconsin has in that game, then I would feel really confident moving forward against them. And BYU, from a metric standpoint, in my opinion, is very similar to Missouri, where their Ken Pom offense is 11 and their Ken Pom defense is 68. Missouri finished the year Ken Pom offense fifth, Ken Pom defense 73. Tempos are fairly the same. BYU's 180, Missouri is 121. I did look at the BYU roster, and I don't believe, based off those numbers, that they have the size, both vertically or just being built like Missouri was. And as we know, Missouri was hyped up for that game against us. We had just come off against losing to Auburn. I feel really confident about our team, not only getting to the second weekend, but having an opportunity to play to get to the second Final Four in program history. But I also want to respect the opponent, have our focus on Robert Morris. Again, if our guys come out there, play with max effort, focus, play, defense, lock in, it should be a game that we win comfortably. Maybe see a Max Charnowski sighting again for 3 minutes like we did against Kentucky. And then we can move on to focusing on either seeing St. Mary's or Vanderbilt for that Sunday game.
Yeah, I think my preferred matchup out of the two between Saint, if you get through Robert Morris, which I'm not overlooking them, but I mean, Alabama's only lost to, I think the lowest ranked team that they've lost to in Ken Pom is, I think it's Oregon, who's 31st in Ken Pom. So, like, I'm again not discrediting Robert Morris, but Alabama's taking care of lesser opponents. I mean, they come away with wins. I'll say that. Maybe not taking care of, but they've come away with wins against the teams that they're supposed to beat. Um, and then they've against the quad one teams that they've played, that's where they've kind of stumbled a bit with the 8 losses. But when you look at Vanderbilt, I personally don't want to see an upset prone Vanderbilt because I've seen them upset teams. Like it's not been, oh, Vanderbilt's beaten one top 10 team. They've beaten like 3 or 4 top 10 teams this year. And some of them were on the road too. Like I think they beat Tennessee at Tennessee. I'm pretty sure. It's either Tennessee or
They,
Kentucky
they beat Texas A&M on the road
at
this
Texas
year.
A&M. Yeah, like Vanderbilt's a very good team that played in the most difficult league in conference history. I preferably wouldn't want to see them compared to a St. Mary's team that will have to figure out how to play Alabama's tempo on a day of rest. I just, um, I think that'd be advantageous, especially when the St. Mary's team only scored, what was it, like two threes against Gonzaga in the WCC championship. Like, I think that that's an advantageous matchup for Alabama, same as last year. Like I said that last year, if Alabama faced St. Mary's, I would feel more comfortable about it than Grand Canyon. Obviously, we faced Grand Canyon and beat them, but I'm kind of in the same boat as I prefer to, face St. Mary's. But just kind of my initial thoughts.
Here's my biggest concern with our team right now is we've had some great games and we're playing a lot better basketball right now than we've played at any point during the season. But we still haven't really stacked like three really good performances back to back to back, in my opinion. I could look at the Kentucky, Mississippi State, Tennessee games and say that that's probably the three that I would go to. Obviously, you have the loss against Tennessee where you really stumbled late and everybody's owned up to their part of it, so no reason to belabor it. But even in that game against Kentucky, we know that we started off poorly, at least for the first five and roughly the first 10 minutes of that game. So maybe it's more of focusing on approaching you're, as I think Coach Oates said in his press conference, you're playing in a four-team tournament and you obviously focus on the game in front of you, but you just worry about those two games. And then you worry about the next two games. And then you worry about the next two games. And you don't have to necessarily worry about stringing a bunch of great performances back to back to back. You worry about these two, do what you need to do, and then get to the next two. And so that is my one concern for whatever reason with this team is just we have not, in my opinion, been able to have a run of 4, 5, 6 games where you really feel like this team is hitting on all cylinders, getting the results that you want, and not having those, 5, 10 minute lapses that can really put you in a lot of trouble and lose games for you.
I agree. And I thought maybe we were figuring it out coming off the Auburn and the Kentucky game, and then the Florida game happens. Um, my other concern about this team going into the tournament, it's actually kind of has to do with what Nate Oates said in his press conference or on Hey Coach tonight about Grant Nelson, which is, oh, he's going to be questionable Friday, but at minimum, he should be able to play on Sunday. Like Nate's already assuming that they're winning Friday, which is fine as a coach, but like I don't want that type of mentality to seep into the players and then them not take Robert Morris seriously. You know what I'm saying? Like it's fine when you're talking about an injury, like, oh, hopefully he'd be able to go Sunday if we play. Well, it's a one game tournament now. Like it's win or go home. Season's over if you lose. I don't want to be focusing on, oh, a player might be available Sunday. We should only be focusing on Friday and then move to Sunday if you get to Sunday, in my opinion. Um, I don't know if you guys agree or disagree with that.
No, I completely agree. And I was a little bit surprised, but also knowing that this is our coach, that he talked about, Final Four is the expectation, and anything short of the Final Four is a disappointment. Um, but I also like this team needs some confidence. It got some playing against Kentucky and should have had some after the first half, and then that kind of got taken away with the second half. But this team is clearly good enough to win a national championship, and just trying to maybe instill that confidence. And I know they're not looking over Robert Morris either. But the same thing that I told y'all, Robert Morris is going to take this game seriously. And unfortunately, we have played some teams of Robert Morris's caliber where I don't feel like we've taken it seriously and we've had to kind of sweat out those second halves, like in Arkansas State, like a McNeese State, like in North Dakota. You know, when we when I've talked about winning time, probably more times than I need to this year, like there could be an opportunity for winning time in the first half against Robert Morris if you approach the game the right way. So I hope we approach it the right way. And it's very similar to kind of how the Charleston game maybe played out last year, where you get hot, you play well, you defend, and it's more about how do you rest and get guys ready for that potential Sunday game against either Vanderbilt or St. Mary's and not having to sweat it out. Because also as Alabama basketball fans, we've seen Alabama struggle as a 2 seed. Saw them struggle against Florida Atlantic in 2002. Saw them struggle against Iona in 2021. So hopefully this 2 seed's a little bit better for this team than it was for those teams back then.
I'm not concerned about Alabama, whether it be Nate Oates or the players looking past Robert Morris. And one of the reasons I am is actually because of him addressing Grant tonight and talking about Sunday. The reason I think Oates was talking about it and being so direct about it tonight is because he's getting ahead of it. He's going ahead and addressing that now, so he doesn't have to talk about it the entire rest of the week. He and his players don't have to get distracted by it heading into that Friday game, because he still has, if it's, I'm not a journalist anymore, but if it's set up like it used to be, he's still going to have probably 2 more media availabilities before then, not to mention all the talking with ESPN and all that crazy stuff. So by addressing that now, it's a way for him to get that worry out of everyone's mind so that they can focus on the task at hand. So I'm not concerned about them getting distracted. I think that was just them clearing their minds. I think they're going to take this very seriously, as they should. And yeah, I just wanted to make that point. I think this kind of the opposite, in that I think it's good that he actually addressed that tonight.
Well,
This is
one
why we
thing
have
that
you on the podcast, Joey.
yeah,
At
that
least I'm
big
good
J
for something.
that
The
big J
big J.
journalism, inside information.
The liberal media.
Um, Something that I was listening to the Next Round Live, and Dunaway was playing an interview that he did with Jaron Stevenson. And I know player meetings can become cliche, and it's like if something goes wrong, you have to have a player meeting. That is something that I did expect with this team at some point early on, of being player led, that you would have some type of player meeting of guys, we're just not playing up to the standard that we should. And it sounds like that they had a players only meeting when they got back from the SEC championship. Now, we'll obviously see how that goes. And again, I understand a lot of those things can be cliche, but we've got leaders on this team. And I think those leaders, thinking about the North Carolina game from this year, where things were kind of really shaky, and what is this team going to be, especially with Latrell Wrightsell going down. And I remember guys like Houston Millett and Chris Youngblood, being in that huddle. The ESPN cameras caught them as far as, taking that charge and taking that leadership. We need guys like that to step up and help lead this team. And so hopefully that players only meeting, if they did have a players only meeting, is going to be energizing and help these guys get focused for this last run.
And I think Nate Oates said something that was very poignant in his post-game press conference following the Florida loss, which is, you have how many? 4 fifth-year seniors on this team. For them, if they lose a game, their college career is over. If Mark Sears is done after this tournament as far as his career at Alabama. And it's up to those 4 fifth-year seniors, Grant Nelson, Chris Youngblood, Cliff Amori, Mark Sears. It's up to those guys to push this team to the heights that it's capable of going, right? And I think at times, like, I think you've seen LeBaron Philon be kind of a leader out on the court, which is great for a freshman. But when it comes to winning time in the NCAA and when it comes to winning time in March, experience wins games. Mark Sears carried the Alabama to a Final Four with the help of Grant Nelson, Jaron Stevenson. They had some great games. But Mark Sears in the Clemson game was the reason why Alabama won that game. Grant Nelson in the UNC game is the reason why they won that game. Alabama needs those players, those guys to step up and step their game up to the level that they played at last year, and even higher if they want to get further along, right? And so I think it's important for me, looking at this first game, is how does Mark Sears come out? I'm not worried that Mark Sears is going to give effort on defense. I'm not worried about Mark Sears as far as facilitating because he's done really good job of that as of late. Mark Sears needs to make sure that he's shooting efficient shots like he was last year in the NCAA tournament. If he shoots 17 shots, he doesn't need to go 5 of 17, right? Um, I don't really need to say much about Grant. He was playing really well versus Florida early in that game. I think he was a big difference maker as far as our effort was concerned. But we need the Grant Nelson that showed up versus Kentucky versus Florida in last year to show up. We need Cliff Amore that showed up in the SEC tournament to play like he was playing. You need Chris Youngblood that scored 27 on Mississippi State. Like this is the end of their career. And I hope that the guys play with their hair on fire and play like it's the end of their career. Because, NATO's has said that they're going to be the toughest, hardest working team in the country. It's time for these guys to prove that they're not going to get out efforted, even if they're not shooting well. And they didn't show that versus Florida. Florida came out of the second half, got 4 offensive rebounds on 1 possession. Now, I will say, speaking on that, 3 of the offensive rebounds bounced directly into Florida's players' hands when we were boxing out. There's not much you can really do about that. That's basketball. But like doing everything in your power to win a game is what Alabama's going to need to do, regardless if they're shooting 30% from the floor in a game. And that's what I hope happens. So, do we want to talk anything else about the bracket?
I'm kind of once you get to March, one game at a time.
Well, I was more talking
I
about
agree.
any other matchups in the bracket that we might want to be interested in talking in.
I mean, there's a lot of potential good matchups. I mean, we were just talking, I think, before the pod about how many good potential second round games there are going to be. Um, you have that Auburn Louisville potential game, which will be, in the state of Kentucky. Louisville's going to play all out. Potential, Michigan, Texas A&M. Obviously, BYU, Wisconsin. Obviously, all these are assuming, but
Talk.
Oregon, Arizona. You just really have a lot of really good Houston, Gonzaga. I could sit here and list pretty much every second round matchup, but there's a lot of. I feel like this year more than several years, there's a lot of. I feel like the vast majority of teams are very deserving to make it into the tournament this year, and most of the time that is the case. But I feel like this year in particular, you're just going through the list, and every single team with maybe not North Carolina, but most teams on here are deserving of being there, and it creates a really good quality matchup. If there's an argument to be made that the tournament does not need to be expanded, I think it's this right here. Sorry, West Virginia fans, I know y'all deserve to be in the tournament, especially over North Carolina. And if the tournament was expanded, you would be in here. But that's not enough for me to say that the tournament needs to be expanded. So, but yeah, looking forward to it. Looking forward to this podcast every week. Hopefully, we'll still have several more weeks left to talk. Because when this team's out, we're out. We'll have one more episode, but hopefully, we'll be talking for 3 or 4 more weeks.
Um,
Ugh.
well, so just a note for people that are interested. We're working through the specifics right now. I will be posting a bracket challenge, either on my account or on the Crimson Crossover account, for those of you listening. And what that's going to look like is we are actually partnering with Heat Pizza in Tuscaloosa and J&J Apparel, which is our, apparel partner that we use. And there will be prizes for first, second, and third place in the bracket challenge. Um, those prizes are to be determined at this point. We're still working through the specifics, but for the first time in, I think, Crimson Crossover history, that we have well, no, I think we did something with Alumni Hall for the winner a couple years ago, but these are going to be a lot different prizes, a lot bigger prizes. So thank you to Heat and J&J Apparel for that. Additionally, we are working with them on potential promo code discount codes throughout March Madness. So again, be on the lookout for that as well as we work through that. And then just subscribe to the YouTube channel. If we get through the first round, Charles and I and Joey, you don't have to sign up for this. I know your schedule's been crazy, but we'll have a short podcast on the next round game, probably like 15, 20 minutes, just previewing the next opponent. And we'll try to do that for every opponent. So hopefully you have at least, what would that be? 6 more episodes of the Crimson Crossover podcast this season, meaning that Alabama would have gotten to the national championship game.
That pod will be
So
lit.
yeah, yeah. I don't know what I would do with myself if Alabama gets the national championship game. I
It'd
just
probably be just all three of us just sitting here in stunned silence for 15 minutes, and then
yeah,
and then it would cut off.
pass. I'd pass away. I'd pass away. Um, but we also have post game spaces. I don't believe we'll have one this Friday just because it's in the middle of the workday. Um, So we'll do one on Sunday, I believe. So we'll recap the weekend. If Alabama gets the Sunday, we'll recap the weekend. We'll probably end up doing the same thing the next week as well, just because most games are either during the middle of the work week, so it makes it a little bit difficult. But we'll just play it by ear on that. But that's just kind of our schedule. And outside of that, the women's bracket. Do you want to talk about the women's team, Charles?
Yeah, I'll break it down real quick. Not hosting, got a 5 seed, still great season so far from them, and they still got a lot to play for, of course. Playing against Green Bay, so we're playing against the Horizon champion on the men's side. We're also playing against the Horizon champion on the women's side. Green Bay's led by Natalie McNeil. She averages about 15 points. She also leads them in rebounds with about 7.5 per game. They've got depth, or at least they play 8 to 9 ladies, at least 15 plus minutes. Where for a team like ours, we've got several of our starters that pretty much play the entire game. I think we've got better talent, and especially if it's a game that we come out and we shoot the ball well from three. I think it's a game that we can win pretty comfortably. Interestingly enough, with this kind of pod of us, Green Bay, Maryland, and Norfolk State. Both Alabama and Green Bay played Norfolk State this year. We beat Norfolk State by 10. Green Bay got past them by a point. So if Norfolk State can pull the upset, while that might be concerning to some to play Norfolk State in basketball, I will say this is on the women's side. Christy Curry is, I don't even know the right multiplier to put on it. It's a very high multiplier as far as better basketball coach than Avery Johnson Jr. or excuse me, Avery Johnson is.
And Avery Johnson
Um,
Jr.
and Avery Johnson Jr. So but we also played Michigan State earlier this year, which is a Big Ten team, beat them. I think Michigan State ended up getting a 7 seed in the NCAA tournament. It's a team that Maryland took care of. Maryland also got beat by, I think it was 30 points to Texas in the SEC. And Texas and South Carolina are both 1 seeds in the women's NCAA tournament. It's not shocking that Maryland would have gotten beat by that much, but just to say, they've played some SEC opponents just like we played some Big Ten opponents. So I expect us, having the opportunity to play Maryland, which does have a lot of women's basketball history, has been really, really good. Um, the opportunity to go in and win that game, and then you're most likely playing South Carolina in Birmingham for a Sweet 16 game. I hope that all falls together, comes to fruition. We should have a lot of confidence with going through the SEC, the teams that we played. So really excited to watch them. Their first game will be Saturday at 12:30, which means the game against Maryland will be on Monday. Obviously, we don't have a time for that as of yet. We can share that with you most likely on the space Sunday after we take care of St. Mary's or Vanderbilt, but excited to have a full weekend of Alabama basketball, both on the men's and women's side here coming up.
Absolutely. And I mean, congratulations. What is this, the third or fourth consecutive year that Alabama women's have made the NCAA
Third,
tournament?
third consecutive year and 4 out of the last 5.
Yeah, which is just a remarkable turnaround
Yes.
for Alabama. Um, I'm hoping, fingers crossed, because I think we get Birmingham, right? If
Yes.
if we somehow can get there, and then you get home games, which I assume some Alabama fans might be in attendance for those games. So,
Especially
um,
playing against South Carolina. I think
yeah,
you could get, I'm sure South Carolina will travel well, but I think you could get a really strong pro Alabama crowd, which first time we played South Carolina this year, we played them pretty well. We did not shoot the ball well from three. We ended up losing 76 to 58. But Nick Kelly, I know, went to the game and he talked about that game was a lot closer than what the score line eventually became. So, if we can come out in a game like that and shoot the ball well from three, get the crowd behind you, make it really tough for South Carolina and have an opportunity to create some more history for this team and this program.
yeah. I watched that South Carolina game, and Alabama was within like 5 points with 7 minutes to go in that game. And they were really fighting South Carolina, and ultimately South Carolina did what South Carolina always does, which is they pulled away, ended up winning by like 16 or something like that. But um, really exciting things happening in the world of the state of Alabama basketball, with Troy getting in, Alabama State getting in, Auburn, Alabama, on the women's side too. It's really unfortunate about the South Alabama thing that Joey kind of alluded to, with the NIT. Um, it's kind of disappointing that happened. So, hopefully they'll figure that out. But just really good in the state of Alabama. Just happy that I feel like it's becoming a basketball state, truthfully. Like, I mean, I know football is king in the South and especially in Alabama, but I don't know. There's something in the water in this bed with this basketball stuff going on.
Well, I do hope the state capitalizes on the success. And I know both our program and Auburn have done a little bit more as far as traveling the state and having more neutral site games in a Birmingham or a Huntsville. I think there's an opportunity to include some of the other teams win the state. I mean, North Alabama was right there on the cusp. UAB was also on the cusp. They're either in December or, finding the right weekend in November. But more than I think December would be better, there should be, a day at Legacy Arena where you get four Alabama teams not playing each other, but bringing in top competition from around the country, and allowing fans to have a centralized location to watch those and continue to grow, like you said, how Alabama is becoming a basketball state.
Absolutely. Well, like I said, that's all we got as far as the podcast is concerned. We will talk again next week. Either it's going to be a really disappointing podcast or a really good, happy podcast. So, uh, if you haven't already, check out the Weekly Joe as well. We're actually recording it right after this. Alabama baseball is ranked 10th in the country, and just came off
Hot,
a came off
hot.
a sweep of Texas A&M. So, um, and I think they face Tennessee this week too.
Tennessee Thursday, Friday, Saturday with a midweek game against South Alabama in Tuscaloosa. I think on Tuesday night.
Yeah,
Took care of UAB in the midweek game. This team has a flair for the dramatics. Bats really come alive in the ninth inning, like to hit bombs. So yeah, it's been a fun team to watch. And it's not just the hitting, pitching has been phenomenal too. So hopefully that can keep up going into this weekend against Tennessee.
absolutely. All right. I think that's all, and we'll talk again soon. Roll Tide.
Roll Tide.
Well, Todd.